Well, what is a carrot? Well, a carrot, Master, is a vegetable. Well, if it's a vegetable, what kind of a vegetable is this? The disciple says, Master, this is a carrot. And by that time, Socrates smilingly says, yes, and now my ignorance is complete. Yet how many of us have been accustomed to name substitution for idea? There is scarcely an idea that we possess that hasn't died in the naming. There is practically no principle which we seek, in which our desire to discover is not satisfied merely by name. Instead of searching for idea content, we call things by names that have been given to them. True, if we are to believe Genesis, these things were named according to their natures. But their natures are concealed in the names, only by gematria. To discover the meaning, we must penetrate the veil, or the name. Therefore, in the mysteries, the name was emblazoned upon the gate of the sanctuary. But it was so emblazoned as to be undecipherable, concealed in some symbolic form that might not easily be captured or known. It identified the house of the God, but it did not reveal the God. In the same way, nature, as the great name, identifies the house of cause, or the house of principle, but it does not reveal the principle. It shows us a series of symbolic depictions of principle. But as long as we are willing to accept the shadow for the substance, the name for the thing named, we are in a desperate situation of ignorance. Here is where modern semantics is stepping in an effort to relieve us from the burden of name. We name a person, and yet in naming them, we accept them without knowing them. Yet we regard the fact that we possess their name as important. We know or believe that if we can call a person by his right name, he is a friend. If we call him by his first name, he is an intimate friend or a relative. But called by any name, he remains unknown. For actually, the name is never, as far as our thinking is concerned, enough to provide us with the substance for which that name stands. The name, therefore, is applied to a being, a condition, a situation, or a fact. Yet by this, we have only the stimulation of a general identification or orientation. We do not have the substance. This furthermore points out the danger of the total substitution of the spoken word for idea. It reminds us that the essential facts we desire can never be communicated by word alone, and also reminds us, as the Greek pointed out, that we have come into the sovereign difficulty of all. We now have come to think with words. This is a very important thing. When an idea comes to us today, even out of ourselves, this idea, before it is even concreted, is expressed in our own consciousness by a name. We give it a name before we have even formulated it. We think with words. And because words have sunk into us from a great many association factors, they have become like tiny blocks with which we attempt to build up ideas. Therefore, we array a word against a word and believe that we are toying with ideas, which we are not. We have never permitted ideas to have the freedom from the word. Now, certain ideas are very sacred, and these ideas are protected by symbolic words. But common ideas which we should know are not protected. They are bound, they are held, they are imprisoned. Ideas are incarnated in words, and having thus taken embodiment They come under the same restrictions as all embodied things. Words are born like bodies. They have a life and they die. Languages are born, flourish for a time, and die. The meanings of words are born, flourish for a time, and die. And in our constant growth, we are forever changing the meanings of words. Therefore, none of these meanings have essential stability. All this might sound quite a long ways from philosophy, but it really is not. It is an essential thing to be contemplated and considered. And in your Indian thinking, the word always represents a kind of test, an initiation, the possibility of penetrating beyond the word, the possibility of passing through the gateway of the word, to discover, if possible, the substance behind this elusive, shadowy form. Another strange thing about words is that, like all other symbols, they are not identical in meaning to different persons. And the same word spoken by one to another will have a different meaning if spoken by that other to still another. Words, therefore, are not adequate for the transmission of ideas. They merely permit us to pass and exchange and barter certain common goods. But as we go deeper into meaning, we have to find another method of communication. Dr. Breasted, University of Chicago, pointed out that it was his opinion that when Champollion broke the Egyptian hieroglyphs, giving us, for the first time, a power to read this language, which had been locked for a long time, probably better than 1800 years, that actually this breaking down of the barrier through the Rosetta Stone was not what had been hoped. He was convinced, Dr. Breasted, that the Egyptians had two complete languages which they held together by one set of hieroglyphs. They had a language for the preservation of ordinary knowledge, and they had a sacerdotal language in which they used the same glyphs with a totally different meaning. That the outer form and the inner form were only apparently the same. The priest, therefore, could write in the common character, and the reader would come to some common knowledge, but not the original meaning, which only another person of the same understanding as the writer could actually comprehend. In Europe, this same procedure drifted into ciphers, in which sudden or secret meanings were concealed within familiar word patterns and could only be discovered by those possessing the key to the decoding of the cipher. Thus, we have a whole group of factors involved in this concept of words and their relation to religion and philosophy. Ultimately, this means that the exhaustion of ideas in philosophy requires a far greater knowledge of language and of words than we have realized. This implies then that ultimately language will have to move into the philosophic group, because only when we have this knowledge can we rapidly advance certain ends which will otherwise remain obscure. For example, in the New Testament, we are inclined to think that the stoning of Stephen marked the first martyr of Christianity. That Stephen, who has since had a very important place, was a person's name. Actually, this is not the case. If there was this man and he was stoned, unfortunately, we do not know his name. Because to the student of language, it becomes immediately obvious that Stephen could not be his name. Because Stephen comes from Stephani, which means a winner in a public competition. This man had either been a winner in the games or in some rhetorical competition. He had been crowned with the Stephanic crown. Therefore, he had the distinction of having been so honored. The fact that he was so honored has been forgotten, and now it is presumed that his honor is his name. Another example is the famous mystery surrounding the identity of Melchizedek, king of Salem. We are not at all sure who or what this Melchizedek may be, because the name doesn't tell us. It is not a name at all. It merely tells us that this man was a priest of Zedek, that he was therefore a priest of an ancient deity. And we must search in the mysteries and the rituals and the symbolisms of the cult of Zedek for the things we have now merely summarized together under the name of a man. That this follows through is also into the second part, because he was king of Salem. Now we, of course, think of Salem inevitably as a place, but Salem means simply peace. He was a prince of peace. He was a holy man. And the fact that he was or was not from any community has no value in the decoding of the thing for which he stands, a point which is still locked scholars because they have tried to make these things appear historical. That there may have been such a priest, we do not deny. But the importance of him and his place in the scripture deals with an entirely different subject. Also, we find a point which I think is maybe worth mentioning in this respect: the habit that has long survived of identifying the deities of one faith with the evil geniuses of another. Whenever a faith has been overthrown by its adversary, and another religion has taken its place, the old gods have been slowly but inevitably transformed into demons. So in medieval demonology, we have a whole group of evil spirits, princes of darkness, all of them derived in some way from honorable terms of another faith. For instance, when we wish to think of utter and complete confusion, we perhaps will follow the thinking of Milton in his Paradise Lost, where he makes the evil spirits to abide in pandemonium. Now, the word pandemonium is derived from the word Pan, which was the nature deity of the ancient Latins and Greeks, and to a measure of the North African Egyptians. Pan, the basic term of our word panic also, and also of our prefix Pan, Pan-American, Pan-Pacific, simply means in the sense of spreading over all, or covering all, or including many things. Pan-America would be all the Americas considered together, and Pan was the god of all nature. But he had the body, supposedly, of a goat with hoofs and the horns of a ram or goat. Right. And he gradually got transformed into our traditional devil, simply because he was no longer fashionable. Another good example is Beelzebub, prince of devils. He is Baal-zebub, my lord who sings, that's one of the highest and most important good deities of the Babylonians. Each one of these terms has thus gotten into trouble. The daemon of Socrates became the demon of medieval theology, quite a different meaning entirely. But the attendant guides and guardians of one became the tutelary infernal spirits of another. And our name Lucifer from Lux Pharaoh simply means the bearer of light, and has nothing to do with the connotations now associated with it. Thus, names have again been perverted for various purposes and uses, and about this we must sometime stop and give pause and thought. The Mithraic rites of Persia, following the older Zoroastrian and Zarathustran cult, developed around the mystery of the ineffable name. the symbol of life. In the Egyptian mysteries, the supreme power of life was represented by the Croix Ansata, or the ansated cross, a cross in the form of a T with a loop above the center of it. The ansated cross was the original Nilometer, a device used by the Egyptians in estimating the inundation of the Nile. If the river failed to raise sufficiently to cause the cross to be formed by the meeting of the beams, there was not enough water to ensure the crop, and therefore there was no life, there was not salvation. This symbol later became a concealing form for the Word, or the ineffable name itself, and is shown issuing from the mouth of Ramesses the Great on the carvings. The little cross comes out of his mouth at the time when he spares the life of an enemy or pardons a criminal or something of that nature. It is a sign of forgiveness, or the return of life, the re-bestowing of life. In ancient times, the life principle, as General Pite points out in his interpretations of the Zohar, the life principle was also associated with the concept of generation, which means to give life. Therefore, in the earliest symbolism, the ineffable name or power is associated also with the concept of the generative force of nature, or of the universe. And in its earliest forms, we still find traces, therefore, of the old agrarian cults, and we find forms and traces of primitive phallic worship, or the worship of the principle of generation. One of the most sophisticated and highly evolved of all these great systems of thinking comes to us, of course, through the Hindu. And today we are most likely to contact the Omkara, or sacred name, in the teachings of Yoga, Vedanta, or perhaps Northern Buddhism. In these systems, the name plays a comparatively vital part because it is said to possess certain power. And the methods for the pronunciation of the name are held to be of the highest sacredness. In the great concept of the Jagat Gurus, the master presents the mystery of the name to his successor prior to the departure of the master out of this life or into permanent retreat in some place where he is no longer to contact the world. The passing of the name, the passing in this case of the mystery of the vibratory significance of the Omkara formula, is held to be the supreme indication of enlightenment. Of course, the moment you approach this in the Eastern way, you come upon a series of very interesting but confusing symbols. In the first place, from the older writings, we know that the word now known as the ineffable was originally not regarded as in any way secret or mysterious in itself. Most of the Vedic hymns and the great prayers of the Rig Veda particularly open and close with this word. And there is no doubt that by derivation and by extension, we will find that it lies behind the use of the word Amen in connection with our own religious observances. Amen, of course, being derived directly from the Egyptian, but indirectly from Asia. Amen being the name of a deity, rather than a salutation or a statement of respect, veneration, or a closing or terminating of a sacred session. The Amen, of course, is supposed to divide sacred from profane utterances or concerns, and is to separate our common speech from any speech related to holy matters. In the use of the Omkara formula, therefore, it was not actually the word itself that was sacred. It was the use of it, what it stood for, and how the understanding of it was to be applied. In the ancient times, then, this word, which was divided into three essential parts, or two complete parts and a half part, a time, and a half time, which we find referred to in sacred writings, having to do with this particular problem. The Omkara is first of all a symbol of a total concept. And I'm going to draw from an entirely different source for just a moment, because I want to clarify a symbolism by means of reference to the Japanese system of flower arrangement. In the Ikonobo style, the formal flower arrangement formula, all of the elements of design are reduced to three. And these three are referred to in the older text as the blossom, the bud, and the leaf. Now, the leaf and the blossom are a time, and the bud is a half a time. There is again a mathematical formula, because the bud is not yet complete. It is only a part. Through the combination of these three factors, the leaf, the blossom, and the bud, an infinite diversity of symbolic arrangements can be produced. Each of these arrangements testifying to a total fact, a total or complete experience, or a reality. When the Ikonobo master has completed his basic flower arrangement, he will probably not any longer leave merely these three. He will extend them as Pythagoras extended the principal points of the tetractys, which are the 3 points of the upper part of the pyramid of 10 dots. These three are the roots. And in the Ikonobo system, again we have the 3 and the 7 making 10. For the master of the flower arrangement, having prepared or placed his 3 elements, will then involve these elements with 7 secondary combinations. These 7 combinations apparently obscuring the 3 or hiding them. A reminder that in ancient times it was assumed that there were actually 7 vowels, but in the development of the science of the sacred name, only 3 of those vowels are ever used. The others are not used, relating as they do to a less sacred matter. And in the ancient Hebrew language, there were only 3 vowels and 7 consonants, which is said to be the reason why our ancient Hebrew friends early developed the tendency to talk with their hands, there being not enough letters or words available to them. And it was only after ages in which the language became sufficiently rich for it no longer to be actually necessary to use a kind of diagrammatic use of hands, gesture, and motion, which incidentally also occurs in your mudras of India, of which there are 3 and 7 essential groups or patterns. Now, when your flower arrangement is complete and you contemplate it, you then begin the process of the gradual acceptance of a supreme mathematical formula, a formula that moves through everything, a formula which, according to both Hinduism and Buddhism, has been stamped upon the whole face of the universe. Therefore, your flower arrangement in its little bowl rises from rocks which represent the earth, or the fourth principle unnamed. And it rises in the form of three living things, each of a different length, each with a different relationship. And these in turn unfolded or enclosed by additional lines mathematically derived from the I Ching or the trigrams of the Chinese, by means of which ultimately a total design is invoked or brought into existence. If you study these three arrangements, therefore, you can also turn to Oriental art, which is based upon your flower arrangement formula. Here you observe that your picture always consists of three parts: heaven, earth, and man. You find that the entire relationship is therefore factually mind, body, and person. Mind, body, and person indicates, for example, that a mysterious loom is set up, the Monocordium Mundi of Pythagoras. A mysterious bridge is used to span between mind and matter. And this bridge that spans this interval produces a series of factors which ultimately cause what we call man. Therefore, heaven is the flower, or mind is the flower. Body is the leaf, because it does not bear fruit. And the bud is man, who is the potential God, and from whose growth must ultimately unfold the entire mystery. In the Buddhist lotus, which is often used in the same symbolism, the lotus becomes the living symbol of the ineffable word. It becomes so because its roots are in the earth. Its stem passes up through the element of water. Its surface and its blossom break forth into air, and its face is turned upward and nourished forever by the light of the fire of the sun. Therefore, it ascends through the elements or qualities, and in so doing tells us the essential pattern of life. In Oriental art also, every pattern must in some way be triangulated. There must be in every perfect design the essential symbols involved in the great concept of the word. For all these things are pictures of a kind of word. Thus you will find some very simple and conventional design. You will find a mountain on a painting. You will find a representation of a mountain. And at the foot of the mountain, forests, and in the midst of the forest, a stream flowing. And by the side of the bank of the stream, an old man fishing. There is a complete statement of the Omkara, or the sacred word. The mountains, the sky, the great distances represent heaven. The water and the earth below and the forest represent the element of earth. And always between them, in some relation, is placed man, either fishing in the waters of life, or contemplating, or in some way taking his sustenance from nature, but separated from it. Sometimes this old man may be riding a horse, or a buffalo, or some creature, to indicate again that man rides upon his body, which is another fact, and by his body is bound to the element of earth below. You will also sometimes see a rather interesting thing, and that is an old gentleman riding upon some kind of a creature and bearing in his hand a scepter, or a long pole surmounted by a tassel of some kind. The scepter, if you examine it in the Chinese art, is always composed of clouds. The cloud scepter. Therefore, here we have again the triangle. The oxen, the man, and the cloud scepter. Heaven, the scepter. Earth, the ox. Man riding between. Always the return of this triangulation. Now, apart from the symbolism, either in flower arrangement or in art, statuary, or in architecture, where it frequently and almost inevitably occurs, like the triple dome of the Temple of Heaven in Peking, or in the triple-headed Brahma in the Trimuta Cave in the harbor of Bombay. Always this triangulation means something. It means the intimate experience of the relationship of all that exists. Now, how is this sacred monosyllable therefore to be pronounced? And according to the great northern system, which has to do with the turning of the wheel of the law, the great Dhammachakra, the word is spoken not by sound, not by lip, not in any of these words or in any of these ways. It is spoken by a process of internal visualization. Actually, the thundering of names, either before the temple or on the street, cannot produce the solution to the mystery. The thing must be spoken out of an experience of some nature. It must be derived, as the mudra posture is also an unspoken language. But the mudra is not merely a means of conveying. The mudra is a means of experiencing within the self by controlling and directing motion. It is all much more subtle than we might at first imagine. So let us see now what we have here in our pattern of either the flower arrangement or the painting or the three letters, which can be placed side by side or one above the other. If we place them one above the other or in a hieroglyphical pattern attempting a totality, let's see what the three letters stand for. If the three letters do begin with the principle of Agni, pass from Agni to Varuna, and from Varuna to the Mahats, what are they actually telling us? They are telling us that illumination, or the total spiritual experience of man, is dependent upon the interrelationship of three factors. The first of these factors, the fire principle, is man's own consciousness. The second of these factors, in this case the air principle, has to do with environment. Air is the frame, in the Zen philosophy, the frame upon the great picture of all things. In other words, air is associated in philosophy with the concept of the not-self. Air is a mutable factor, invisible in its own nature, and made visible only when it moves things. If you were in a vacuum and air struck you, you would not be aware of its existence, but you might know there was wind if you saw a tree in the distance moving. Therefore, air itself is invisible, but is a cause of motion. Air, then, represents the total concept of illusion, the not-self, phenomenon, fire of noumenon. These two are heaven and earth. Heaven being the transcendent self, earth being the transitory not-self. Now, between these two stands man, symbolized by Pythagoras and all other teachers of importance by the number 5. The number 5, the pentagram, or the 5-pointed star, in esoteric philosophy corresponds to the 5 sensory powers of man, which form, so to say, the bridge between heaven and earth. Therefore, we have internal consciousness, external, the object of consciousness, or environment. And between these two, the bridge of knowing, the bridge of communication, represented perhaps by a little boat floating upon an ocean or upon a river. Thus, we have the thing cognizing, the thing to be cognized, and the instrument of cognition. If the instrument of cognition is destroyed in man, man no longer cognizes. If he loses his sight, he is no longer able to see, even though in consciousness he may possess the power to see. The instrument or the media, therefore, is essential to the existence of the function or the process of a thing happening. But Indian philosophy is not concerned only with this, but with an important development of this theme. So let us say, for the moment, that we now have the blossom, consciousness, the leaf, the object of consciousness, the bud, the unfolding means of consciousness, representing again the A, the U, and the M, because the U was anciently a hook and represented a binder, something that connects two separate things together. And as the hook, or the cant hook, it is a symbol of man as the binder between two things.
Hey, come on.
If, therefore, we begin the contemplation of yoga or Vedanta, what happens? You have often heard the expression that the individual on a certain occasion, being greatly concerned in something or with something, lost himself in his work. You may have used the term with some frequency on one occasion. A man says, I am lost in reverie. I am lost in contemplation. What he is telling you is, I am is lost. That is what he is actually telling you. He is telling you, for example, that under the condition of an intensity, his entire energy quotient is directed away from himself and towards something, or is immersed in something. The nagging parent, complaining constantly over the difficulties of the occasion, suddenly hears the cry of a sick child. Instantly the problem vanishes. The nagging vanishes. The self-equation vanishes. And the individual becomes lost in the significance of that cry. We go to the motion picture. We sit in a seat, some distance from the stage, with bobbing heads in front of us. Or we are looking upon a shadow cast upon a screen. We know that our favorite star's face, as we look at it in a close-up, has a mouth 9 or 10 feet wide, perhaps, and that also that this face is large enough to fill a barn door. We realize that the whole thing is projected by a piece of machinery, that there is no one there except a sound device and a shadow. And yet after 5 minutes, how many of you are aware of that? In a very few seconds, you become lost in the theme, if the picture is worth seeing. If you are aware of the details, you should get up and leave. The picture is not for you. And nowadays, people frequently do that. But in a very brief time, all of the peculiar stenographic shortcuts of theatrical production are forgotten. You find it perfectly possible to make a transition of years in a few seconds.
Right.
You find people moving in and out of rooms without the common courtesy of opening doors. It doesn't bother you in the slightest. You have accepted. And while you are watching the picture, what has happened to you? Where are you? You have attained merely the position or condition of the perceiver. Right. You are not aware that you are the perceiver. You are not aware that you exist. You are simply an area of cognition. If the picture is any good, you may forget even for a moment some aches and pains that have annoyed you.
Right.
You forget the fact that taxes are due. You forget the fact you have just had a religious argument with a friend. These things cease. Why? Because you, as a center of personal integration, you have ceased. You will come back the moment the scene changes, or the picture ends, or the commercials begin. But even on the little screen of a television set, you can still, to a measure, attain the same illusion. You become identified with object and lose identity of subject. Now, actually, this is the phenomenon upon which the complete concept of samadhi has been developed in Eastern thinking. It is also the concept that underlies the parinirvana of the Buddha. Cognition without self. In other words, the pronunciation or the envisioning of the power of the sacred name, when it is frequently represented on a mandala by a design or by a formula of letters, as in the case of certain of the Japanese sects, particularly Nichiren.
Let it go. Yeah.
In the Nichiren-shu, the entire formula of salvation is an elaborate, fantastic design of letters, through the contemplation of which the individual attains illumination. What is the illumination then? The illumination is cognition without self. It is the complete disassociation of the individual with his own center of awareness.
Yeah, get that shit out of here.
This presents the great problem. This is why, in the Indian concept, it is usual to place the Omkara, or the sacred monosyllable, or the mysterious character which is composed of parts but appears to be one, within a radiant aureole of some kind, rays pouring from it. Sometimes it is placed in the face of the sun. Sometimes it is placed in a cup consisting of the union of the sun and moon, and particularly relating to the 1,000-petal chakra in the brain. Sometimes it is placed upon the open pedestal of a lotus flower. Again, the lotus flower, or the blossom, representing, by its unfolding, the revelation of the Omkara, or the divine name. Man seeking for the experience of the name must therefore attempt to define the nature of that consciousness by which he perceives, and without which, and with which at the same time he is without perception of his own existence. Now, this is a very fine point, yet while it is almost incapable of definition, it is commonly and daily experienced by nearly everyone. This is why who names it shall never find it, and who substitutes the name for it, or who spends his life intoning the mantras, will, as the ancients themselves pointed out, fail in the work. Why does he fail in the work? Because in the intoning of the mantra, he must, by volition, perform the action. Now, the point of involvement in the esoteric system is that insight, completely removed from and apart from the volition of the will, it makes possible the immediate apprehension of reality. In other words, the formula is that which can perceive without being aware of the perceiving factor can and does perceive totally. In that instant, the universe bursts open and the individual beholds the radiant form of the symbol of the ineffable. As long, however, as perception is dominated by the will to perceive, as long as the individual looks because, as long as the consciousness of you being the one who sees remains,
Got him.
you are captured
Boy.
on the bridges which link the internal and the external. The moment your own sense of selfhood
Damn.
is
Wow.
permitted to stand between you and total apperception, you will never totally apperceive. Why? Because immediately that which is seen
Got him.
bears a relationship to the one seeing. The individual perceiving, we will say, a certain thing around him. Supposing he looks out and he beholds a house. As long as he sees a house, this in turn causes the rise of the qualities within the nature
Hey, got
by
him.
which truth is blocked. The individual says, I like the house. I do not like the house. I like the color of the house. I wish I had the house. I am glad I do not have the house. The house is good. The house is bad. All of these resemblances and all of these relationships are based upon the acceptance of the individual as the judge of the house. He has determined, in terms of a kind of material utility, that which he will permit himself to see. And that which he sees, he likes, dislikes, accepts, or rejects upon the censorship of his own faculties. Thus, in all of this procedure, there can never be total definition, total understanding, total apprehension of house. If, however, the individual perceiving is unaware of himself as the perceiver, he does not construe, qualify, or censor that which is perceived. In Vedanta and Yoga, therefore, truth is never further from any living thing than the power to perceive it without selfhood. And it can never be any nearer than the self will permit it to be. We are all seeking for the definition of truth. Truth is the absolute, unconditioned fact of a thing. It is that which absolutely is. We can only perceive this when we neither add to nor subtract from the testimony of the apperceiving power of the individual. And to achieve this, we must suspend the faculties of comparison, analysis, acceptance, and rejection. We must cease forever to say, what does this mean to self? And we must say, what is this? By taking, therefore, the mandala concept, the individual apperceives the nature of being from the nature or substance of the Omkara formula. Now, he may apperceive not only with his eyes, he may apperceive also with his ears. It is therefore absolutely necessary to disentangle the sense of hearing from the censorship of self-interest. The individual who hears only to interpret will never hear the voice of the silence. The individual who allows his ears to serve only as a channel between externals and his own ego will never hear more than the ego will permit. But the total absorption of the perceiving power in that which is experienced in hearing is the secret of the sacred mantra. And of course, here again, we are not dealing with something weirdly abstract and unbelievable, but something that you yourself can see, even if you cannot participate in it, by going to a great philharmonic concert or attending a great piece of symphonic music. You will find the audience divisible into a large number of specialized groups. Way up in the less expensive seats, the young students with the score, watching every note and studying every part of the performance. The individual who really was there by accident and wishes he was elsewhere, who will fidget throughout the entire performance and feel that every composition is too long. The individual who appreciates, who says to himself, I know music, therefore this is good. It is the way I feel it should be. The conductor is great. Or here is a version or a rendition with which I am not familiar. I doubt it. I am not willing to accept it as truly great because I have not already decided that it was great. Then you find the individual who is the true musician. And he is the individual completely lost in the music. He no longer knows that he exists. He has discovered a universe of sound, a total area like a great mandala, a tremendous symphonic pattern of acceptances. The music exists, he does not.
Come on.
And he awakens from this piece of music with a start, seeming to come back again into a world of conditioned existence. In the Vedanta and Yoga, we know that the individual who is totally identified with the music is not a listener. He is the music. He has bridged the interval, which divides himself as a being from the total experience which he wishes, or which he is willing to accept. He is no longer analytical. He is no longer interested in composition alone, or anything of that nature. He is responding totally to the sublimity of impact, the totality of music. Thus we live also in a universe of sound. And we have something else. We live in a universe of form. While we examine form, estimate it as the artist does, we may be critical of this, critical of that. We are school-bound. We are worried about modernism. We are worried about impressionism. We are worried about the pre-Raphaelites. We are worried about this, tradition against tradition against tradition. Then we have the individual who is the total artist. The total artist is completely free from the boundaries and barriers of tradition. He is seeking the experience of complete beauty. If he attains that experience, he is unaware of self. He is aware only of beauty. And being aware only of beauty, he is beauty. There is no longer any interval, nor is there any qualification of beauty. That which he experiences is eternal. Man seeking truth, seeking God, seeking the experience, therefore passes through this patterned formula. And this formula is contained in the concept of the three conditions which have to conspire wherever the situation of reality is possible. Therefore, the name is actually the anatomy and physiology of the divine nature. Therefore, in the contemplation by Vedanta of total being, we are told that it may be experienced by different persons in different ways. To one, the suspension of ego in the absorption in the circumstance or in the condition itself may loose a universe of sound. It may cause the complete experience of identity with sound, or it may form an identity with color, or it may form an identity with rhythm or motion. Thus was expressed in Taoism, where reality is absolute rhythmic motion, in which the self is completely lost by being one with a motion which is so profound and so tremendous that there is no longer the possibility of experiencing the motion and still remaining self-aware. In the same system, there is presented to the individual in Vedanta and Yoga, and under the symbolism of the ineffable name, the concept of a total and complete infinite being. An infinite being variously described and defined, but perhaps most available in Vedanta, at least, by the concept of absolute and infinite love. Now, in this concept of absolute and infinite love, the mind has already been trained from that kind of affection which is truly personal to that kind which is truly universal. If, therefore, in the contemplation of the universe, the mystic finds his total absorption or identification with the serenity, the beauty, or the divinity of the divine love, or the infinite compassion of the universal existence for the creatures which it has fashioned, then in this experience, the individual ceases in the very fact of loving. He becomes intimately, emotionally identical with the totality of the universal emotion as he senses it, feels it, or perceives it, without retaining any identity. Consequently, what is true self, the infinite self, which lies beyond the conditioned self? That very infinite self which is also symbolized by the Omkara emblem. That infinite self is the state of you in which you are unaware of your personal self. Therefore, you cannot say of this infinite self, this is its shape, this is its nature, this it likes, this it does not like. Nor can you say to yourself, this I will explore. For the moment you turn your attention upon it, your personal selfhood is reborn and the thing ceases immediately. The true and absolute consciousness of life is that consciousness which is all perceiving without self-perceiving, that has no center, but is diffused throughout the entire area of its acceptances. Thus, identification brings with it this total sense of knowing, without the sense of a knower, without the fact that you know anything. You are in a state of knowing, but not in a state of self-knowing. And in this suspension of all faculties and all powers, you have an ineffable state. An ineffable state for which no conceivable symbol can be devised in its own nature. Nothing can represent it. Perhaps the nearest thing to it would be light itself. But in this sense of the complete power to experience without central focus, you have infinite diffusion of self. You have the possibility of pointing out the situation described by the Swami Vivekananda, namely this sudden realization that you are everything, simply because you have ceased to be something. Man must be something or everything. To be something is earth. To be everything is heaven. To be growing from something to everything is to be man. And this unfolding is represented by the bud. Therefore, in the ancient symbol, the A signifies the everything. The M signifies the something. The U is man, you, yourself. The U, the hook. The thing by means of which everything and something are in eternal relationship to each other. Therefore, within each individual is the infinite capacity to attain to everything by the absorption of self in the contemplation of existence. And whether this existence be a small flower growing in the garden, whether it be a great painting by Michelangelo, like the walls of the Sistine Chapel, whether it be a magnificent piece of architecture, like the Taj Mahal, or a tiny inscribed leaf of vellum by some ancient monk, that which causes the immediate sense of comprehension, the immediate absorption of self in the contemplation of that which is superior or that which is more than meaningful. Whenever this occasion takes place, the individual has the experience of samadhi. He has the experience of existing forever without existing as a person at all. In those moments of complete detachment from self, there is neither beginning nor end, old or young, up nor down. There are no attachments and no detachments. There is a complete absorption. And when this absorption is the result of man's directing his attention to sovereign reality, so that he is able to have the complete experience of reality apart from selfhood, when that occasion occurs, he is said to have completed the formula. And the form in which it comes may be one of three, and each will sound its own keynote. For in this final analysis, three factors are related, and the relation of these three factors makes the experience. So that your real nature, the divine symbol in you, is this mysterious thing by which you can be conscious of things without being aware that you are conscious. Thus, awareness is less than consciousness. Self-awareness blocks it. But the fact that there is a kind of consciousness superior to ego is demonstrated by its complete function free from ego. In fact, its perfect function under that condition.
Right.
This is only the beginning of our discussion, but I see the time is up, so we'll save the rest of it for next week. But we want to do a little more with the name, and then we want to go on to another phase of General Pike's research.
That's the newest one from Albert Pike, though. Watch this one in a second. I gotta win this game. Damn, should hit the corner. And one.
Lao Tzu puts it in this way: the great Tao flows everywhere, both to the left and to the right. It loves and nourishes all things, but does not lord it over them. And when merits are accomplished, it lays no claim to them. The more, therefore, you relinquish power, trust others, the more powerful you become. But in such a way that instead of having to lie awake nights controlling everything, you do it beautifully by trusting the job to everyone else. And they carry it on for you. So you can go to sleep at night and trust your nervous system to wake you up in the morning. You can even tell it, I want to wake up at 6 o'clock, and it'll wake you up just like an alarm clock. This seems a sort of paradox to say this, but the principle of unity, of coming to a sense of oneness with the whole of the rest of the universe, is not to try to obtain power over the rest of the universe. That will only disturb it and antagonize it and make it seem less one with you than ever. The way to become one with the universe is to trust it as another, as you would another, and say, let's see what you're going to do. But in doing that, you see, in saying that to everything else that you have been taught to think is not you, you are also saying it to yourself. Because finally, as I pointed out, you do not know where your decisions come from. They pop up like hiccups. And when you make a decision, people have a great deal of anxiety about making decisions. There's this guy farmer, who ordered a help man to come in, and found he was an extraordinarily efficient worker, because the first day he put him on sawing logs. And he sawed more logs than anybody had ever sawed. It was fantastic. But they were all done in one day. So the next day he put him on to mending fences. And there were all kinds of broken fences around the farm, and in one day he had the whole thing done. So he thought, what am I going to do with this guy? So he took him down into a basement and said, look, here are all the potatoes that have come in from this harvest. And I want you to sort them into 3 groups. Those that we sell, those that we use for seeding, and those that we throw away. So he left him at that. At the end of the day, the laborer came back and said, well, that's enough, mister. I quit. Oh, he said, you can't quit. I've never had such an excellent worker. I'll raise your salary. I'll do anything to keep you around here. I said, no. It's all right mending fences and chopping wood, but this potato business is decision after decision after decision after decision. So when we decide, we're always worrying, did I think this over long enough? Did I take enough data into consideration?
Right.
And if you think it through, you find you never could take enough data into consideration. The data for a decision in any given situation is infinite.
Hey.
So what you do is, you go through the motions of thinking out what you will do about this. And then when the time comes to act, you make a snap judgment. I mean, I'm speaking a little extremely, making some fun of it and so on, because after all, we do occasionally get the vague outlines of things and make a right decision on rational grounds. But we fortunately forget the variables that could have interfered with this coming out right. It's amazing how often it works. But warriors are people who think of all the variables beyond their control and what might happen. So then when you make a decision, and it works out all right, I think very little of it has much to do with your conscious intent and control. But somehow or other, you are able to decide and control things more harmoniously if you delegate authority. That's why very great businessmen are those who can delegate authority. Trust others to work for them. Because those are people developing businesses on the same basic structure that is fundamental to a living organism. Delegation of authority. It loves and nourishes all things, but does not lord it over them. And you see, then, what is happening is this. The more you let go of it and trust it, as if it were quite other than you, the more you realize the inseparable identity of self and other. To go back, if you try to find the identity of self and other by subjecting other to self, no go. If, on the other hand, you find it through giving self, that is control, over to other and trusting that, you may make a mistake. You may make a bad gamble. But in the long run, you're acting on a principle which has the backing of evolution. This is the way biological evolution goes on. Constant delegation of authority. That's why, obviously, the democracy is superior to the monarchy.
Right.
It was de Tocqueville who said that democracy is always right, but for the wrong reasons. Because there is operating in a democracy the principle that Buckminster Fuller calls synergy. And synergy is the intelligence of a highly complex system, the nature of which is always unknown to the individual members. Because that goes back again to this point, that we're always entering a new environment. We don't ever know fully what the new environment is, because the only environments we know are the past ones. There is always then operating in the development of cellular life on any level, a new way of organization, higher than any existing form, and we are not aware of it until after it's happened. If you ever saw, for example, the film Kon-Tiki, this man figured out a few things as to how to make a balsa wood raft to sail from South America to the Pacific Islands. But once he had set this in motion, he discovered that all sorts of unexpected factors cooperated with him. That when the wood got wet, it expanded so that the ties bit into it and held it completely secure. He'd never expected that.
Right.
And he found that as he sailed along, a flying fish would simply alight flat on the deck every morning for breakfast. That all kinds of natural factors, it was just, he had touched a key where he was flowing with the course of nature, and everything cooperated with him. Because he had touched the key. He had made the act of faith. And he was just picking up, in other words, a practice which had been hundreds and hundreds of years ago, had been followed by others who had worked it out by their great ecological awareness. So we do come out of this way of thinking to something which has, I would say, the most enormously creative and revolutionary social consequences. That it has become not virtuous, not self-sacrificing, not anything like that. It has become the hardest practical politics to let go control to others, to give up trying to dominate the scene. Also, in a parallel way, it has become at this time in our history very much hard practical politics. To learn how to enjoy ourselves. You can go to the Protestant people with their Protestant ethic who are against this kind of thing, and now say to them with great glee, it is your solemn duty to learn how to enjoy yourself.
Right.
Why? Because in an age of leisure, people have really got to know how to enjoy themselves. Because if they don't, they'll smash the whole future of the human race. So a utopia has become not some sort of a dream, but an urgent necessity. We can't do without it.
Right.
Because if we try to do without it, what's going to happen is that we are going to terminate our race in a mutual massacre of scapegoats. And so the present paranoia in the United States that is going on, where everybody is thinking up a new scapegoat and how great it will be to demolish them or get them out of power, all this kind of bickering and right and left politics has become irrelevant, because we now have the opportunity of trusting our own intelligence, our own technology, to take the risk of doing what we want, which will work to the extent that we realize that what I want, basically, what I really want is what you want.
Right.
And I don't know what you want.
That's fun.
Surprised me. But that's the kinship between I and thou. So when I ask, I go right down to the question, which we started with. What do I want? The answer is, I don't know.
Hey.
When Bodhidharma was asked, who are you? Which is another form of the same question. He said, I don't know. Planting flowers to which the butterflies come. Bodhidharma says, I know not. I don't know what I want. But when you don't know what you want, you've reached the state of desirelessness. When you really don't know. You see, there's a beginning stage of not knowing and there's an ending stage of not knowing. In the beginning stage, you don't know what you want because you haven't thought about it, or you've only thought superficially. Then when somebody forces you to think about it and go through and say, yeah, I think I'd like this, I think I'd like that, I think I'd like the other, there's the middle stage. Then you get beyond that. Say, is that what I really want? In the end you say, no, I don't think that's it. I might be satisfied with it for a while, and I wouldn't turn my nose up at it. But it's not really what I want. Why don't you really know what you want? 2 reasons that you don't really know what you want. Number 1, you have it. Number 2, you don't know yourself, because you never can. The Godhead is never an object of its own knowledge. Just as a knife doesn't cut itself, fire doesn't burn itself, light doesn't illumine itself. It's always an endless mystery to itself. I don't know. And this I don't know, uttered in the infinite interior of the spirit, this I don't know is the same thing as I love, I let go,
Right.
I don't try to force or control. It's the same thing as humility. And so the Upanishads say, if you think that you understand Brahman, you do not understand, and you have yet to be instructed further. If you know that you do not understand, then you truly understand. For the Brahman is unknown to those who know it, and known to those who know it not. And the principle is that any time you, as it were, voluntarily let up control, in other words, cease to cling to yourself, you have an access of power. Because you're wasting energy all the time in self-defense, trying to manage things, trying to force things to conform to your will. The moment you stop doing that, that wasted energy is available. And therefore you are, in that sense, having that energy available, you are one with the divine principle. You have the energy. When you're trying, however, to act as if you were God, that is to say, you don't trust anybody and you're the dictator and you have to keep everybody in line, you lose the divine energy. Because what you're doing is simply defending yourself. So then, the principle is, the more you give it away, the more it comes back. Now you say, I don't have the courage to give it away. I'm afraid. And you can only overcome that by realizing you better give it away because there's no way of holding on to it.
Right.
The meaning of the fact, you see, that everything is dissolving constantly, that we're all falling apart, we're all in a process of constant death, and that the world we hope men set their hearts upon turns ashes, or it prospers, and like snow upon the desert's dusty face, lighting a little hour or two is gone. You know, all that Omar Khayyam jazz. You know, the cloud-capped towers, the gorgeous palaces, the great globe itself, I, all which it inherits, shall dissolve, and like this insubstantial pageant faded, leave not a rack behind. All falling apart. Everything is. That's the great assistance to you. See, that fact that everything is in decay is your helper. That is allowing you that you don't have to let go because there's nothing to hold on to.
Right.
It's achieved for you, in other words, by the process of nature. So once you see that you just don't have a prayer, and it's all
You ain't
washed
got
up,
a chance anyway.
and that you will vanish and leave not a rack behind, and you really get with that, suddenly you find you have the power, this enormous access of energy. But it's not power that came to you because you grabbed it. It came in entirely the opposite way. And power that comes to you in that opposite way is power with which you can be trusted.
Right.
Of course, what we've been talking about is not so much a set of ideas as an experience, or shall we say experiencing. And this kind of seminar, in comparison with encounter groups or workshops of various kinds, or experiments in sensory awareness, is now being called a conceptual seminar. Although I'm not talking about concepts.
Right.
But the crucial question arises that an understanding, a real feeling understanding of the polar relationship between the individual and the world is something that operates, as we say, in your bones, and isn't just a view that you hold or a belief that you hold.
Oh, they got me for blocking.
It's so curious that the emphasis of the Western tradition in religion is primarily upon right belief. Do you believe in the right dogmas and the right doctrines? And only secondarily upon right action. Because what you believe is, in Christianity at any rate, far more important than what you do.
Right.
Because one is saved through faith, not by works. And early in its history, the Christian church rejected the movement in the church which had been known as Gnosticism, from the Greek gnosis, which means knowledge. And in a way, there were some sound reasons for doing so. Because the Gnostics were what I would call anti-materialists.
Let's go.
They divided human beings into three classes that were called, respectively, pneumatic, psychic, and hylic. The last one being H-Y-L-I-C, from the Greek hyli, or they would call it now Ili, meaning wood. So the people were spiritual, psychological, and wooden. And that is to say, the wooden people were those most absorbed in materiality.
Damn.
And most closely identified with their bodies. And Orthodox Christianity rejected this sort of distinction because of the perfectly correct idea that material existence is not inconsistent with spirituality. This is something which most Christians have forgotten.
Got you.
But they do believe, as the central principle of Christianity, in what's called the Incarnation, that in the Jesus of Nazareth, Almighty God did in fact become material, become human. And by this process, initiated a transformation of the cosmos. In the words of St. Athanasius, God became man that man might become God. And you don't hear that from the pulpit very often.
Right?
The Christian Church therefore emphasized pistis, or faith, as against gnosis, or knowledge. Because they said you can never know God. God could never become an object of knowledge. And in this funny roundabout way, the Christian theologians were saying exactly the same thing as the Hindus. Only the Hindus do call this knowledge of God through faith, they call it jnana, which is the same as the Greek word gnosis. But just to give you a little sidelight on how words get mixed up in their meanings, we now have a class of person called an agnostic. And an agnostic generally means a person who doesn't commit himself to any beliefs about the ultimate nature of things. He just says he doesn't know. But the original word, agnosia in Greek, meant a special kind of knowledge. It was called the dark knowledge of God. The knowledge of God in the cloud of unknowing, to use the title of a mystical treatise written by an anonymous 14th century English monk. This monk derived his ideas from a very mysterious figure who wrote under the name of Dionysius the Areopagite. Dionysius was a 5th or 6th century Syrian monk who had learned his mysticism from Porphyry, who got it from Plotinus, who was a Neoplatonist, and who probably got a great deal of stimulation from the intellectual world of Alexandria. And Alexandria, in the early years of the Christian era, was a tremendous exchange place between East and West. Buddhist monks visited Alexandria. It was one of the great centers of trade between Rome and India.
Yeah.
And as you may know, all Rome's gold eventually went to India for the purchase of pepper. And as a result of this, the Roman economy collapsed. They bought too much luxury from India. India, in exchange, got Roman architecture.
Hey.
And you'll see a lot of Roman architecture in Indian temples. But Alexandria was the great center for the Gnostics and for Christian theology. And some of the greatest theologians, Clement, Origen, Athanasius, St. Cyril, all worked out of Alexandria. Well, now going back to this strange monk, Dionysius, it was he who first put around the idea in Christian circles that there was such a thing of the knowledge as the knowledge of God by faith, by agnosia, really, by unknowing. And he, in a book which he wrote, very short book called the Theologia Mystica, he wrote a treatise on the higher knowledge of God, which might be quoted directly from the Upanishads in certain parts of it. The last section of it reads like the Mandukya Upanishad, because it's a series of negations. It says what God is not.
Damn.
And he goes very far, because he says that God is not one. He says our idea of unity falls far short of what God is. So does our idea of Trinity. So does our idea of spirit, our idea of mind, of justice, of love. All these things are not really God.
And he says in another place, if anybody, having seen God, understood what he had seen, what he would have seen would not have been God, but some creature of God, less than God, some sort of angel or something like that. It's perfectly amazing to consider the influence that this man had. For writing under the name of Dionysius the Areopagite, he became identified, you see, with St. Paul's first convert in Athens. And legend has it that he was the first bishop of Athens and was martyred in Gaul, where he's known as St. Denis. But St. Thomas Aquinas looked upon the writings of Dionysius the Areopagite as having the highest authority. And you could, if all the texts of Dionysius's work had been lost, you could restore most of it from quotations in St. Thomas.
Damn.
He wrote really two very important books. One was the one I said, the Theologia Mystica. The other was called The Divine Names. And these two books presented the two phases of his theology. The book called The Divine Names was a discussion on the nature of God.
Heard him. No.
In terms of what God is like, by analogy. And this kind of knowledge of God he called kataphatic. From the Greek theme, to speak or say, kata, meaning to say according to, that is to say, to speak by analogy. Where he used, though, entirely negative language about God, this sort of discourse was called apophatic. And the word apo meaning away from, to talk away from. Just as a sculptor, when he makes an image, reveals the image by removing stone. And so Dionysius explained that one attains the knowledge of God by discarding concepts, which is exactly what the Hindus mean when they say, of God one can only say neti, neti,
Hey.
not this, not this, not any conception. So thus in Hindu philosophy, the highest state of consciousness in samadhi is called nirvikalpa samadhi,
That shit out of here.
which
boy.
means literally non-conceptual. Vikalpa means a concept.
Hey.
Nir is a negation. So the non-conceptual knowledge. Now, people have greatly misunderstood this. They have imagined that unknowing the state of the highest contemplation
Let me get it.
was the acquisition of a blank mind,
Hey. Let's go.
from which you first discarded thought, you went on to discard perception, you went on to discard any kind of sensory content in awareness, until you were, so far as anyone could say, aware of nothing. And they supposed that this kind of catatonic state was mystical consciousness. This is often believed in India. If you go to the Vedanta Society and ask, what do you mean by Nirvikalpa Samadhi, they will tell you that the one in that state has no consciousness whatsoever of the sensory world. That he is completely absorbed, as you sometimes see Hindu holy men sitting in a state where they are blind and deaf to everything going on around them. The founder of Chinese Zen, known as Huineng, described people like that as no better than pieces of rock and lumps of wood. He said it's a very serious mistake indeed to confuse sunyata, the Sanskrit word for the great void, which is both the ultimate reality and the consciousness thereof. That it's a great mistake to confuse it with nothingness. It is rather to be thought of as space, or like space, because space is not empty. It contains the whole universe.
Right.
And so in the same way, the state of mind of a person who is truly enlightened is not empty. It contains everything. But, like space, it is not stained by what it contains. And it's often said in Zen imagery, you can't hammer a nail into space. You can't spit on the sky and soil it. If you try, the spit will just return and hit your own face. So they go on to say the consciousness in all of us, your basic mind is like space. It is completely pure. But of course by purity, they don't mean unsexual, which is of course what purity generally means in the Western world. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. A person who's pure in heart is generally understood as one who never has any naughty thoughts. You know what naughty means? It means vain, negative, empty. A naughty person, therefore, is one who doesn't amount to anything. It's just nothing. That's the real meaning. But this misunderstanding of the nature of contemplation existed not only in India, from which it was transmitted to China, but also in the West. You read many treatises on Western mysticism, and there's still the feeling that getting into a deep, deep trance, sometimes called rapture, again, the word rapture, has undergone some transformations. We talk about rapture as people being beside themselves with pleasure. But to be rapt means to be taken away from the body. So also ecstasy, we now interpret as meaning in a state of high pleasure. But it means to be outside yourself, to stand outside yourself. Your soul has left you, it is with God. As Arabs say of all crazy people, be kind to them. They're not here, their soul is with God. But actually, if it can be true, as Buddhists say, that nirvana and samsara are one, and if it can be true, as Christians say, that the spirit can be made flesh, the word can be made flesh, then obviously the highest form of man is not sitting in a trance like a lump on a log with a perfectly blank mind. Because if that were the highest state of consciousness, it would be an exclusive state of mind, a state of mind that shuts out life. And in that sense it could not qualify for being what the Hindus call non-dualistic. They always speak of the highest reality as being not one, because one excludes many. Not nothing, because nothing excludes something. Not being, because being excludes non-being, and vice versa. And so they use this word non-dual to mean that which doesn't exclude anything, which, as it were, has no outside. As we say, space has no outside. You can only have outsides inside space. You can't have any outsides outside space. There is no outside space, even though space may be curved and finite. So, yeah, if you
get back to that in a second, let's check a look at this. Let me turn this shit down for a second. Hey, hold on. I know this shit's gonna be loud probably.
And as promised from episode 44, we're going to be going back into St. Louis today, as well as other places. We have even more to share about this incredible city, as well as this general location. I want to show you all something that is hidden under a layer of grass. And if we just removed the grass, we all know at this point what we would find. But how incredible is it? Let's find out today. And I want to show you all something massive, something that is sitting right in front of our faces and has been our entire lives, and in my opinion, for multiple civilizations, and won't be going anywhere anytime soon. And that is the 227-foot tall St. Louis Basilica, which has a seating capacity of 2,500 people. So let's take the camera and go inside this basilica. and dive deep into this mainstream narrative today and expose the lies that have been somehow hidden for so many years. Welcome to episode 45 of My Lunch Break. I hope you're all having a great day, and if you're new, welcome. And I want to thank all of our sponsors for 1907. Supposedly thank you to Rebecca Kay, Don Gaston, Jason Brunson, Maddie Kevs, Christopher Arietta, The Lady Lacey Show, David and Sherry Ferguson, Edwin Johnson, El Chen, Chuck Templeton, Edwin Rice, Joy Lee, Leslie Pimpkins, PNR, Stephanie Nolan, and the Burlesons. You guys are all awesome and helping this channel out a lot. Now, if we want a true representation of the year 1907, supposedly the exact same year that this St. Louis Basilica construction began, then we need to see what was supposedly going on during this year. We are told that this was the panic of 1907, the first worldwide financial crisis of the 20th century, and also the perfect time to begin the $3 million, or converted into 2023, the $98.23 million project. It's actually the worst possible time to begin a project like this. This narrative is already sounding off, and when you find major flaws like this, we know that we have a green light to dig deeper. So let's begin with exposing the supposed architects, Barrett Haynes and Barrett. Reoccurring names, yet again, which we've seen so many times in so many episodes, which is just another giveaway that this name is AI generated. But let's continue. Let's see what this group was up to from 1907 to 1914. The exact same years that we were told that this basilica was built in. You would think that this incredible basilica, that none of us have ever seen anything close to this be constructed today, or at any point in our lifetimes, you would think that these architects would be fully focused on this specific building and making sure that it went perfect. They wouldn't be off building another building at the exact same time, would they? Well, they started 2 other projects at the exact same time as the St. Louis Basilica, because they were just that incredible. And not only that, during the exact same time period that they were supposedly building this massive structure that we've never seen built in our lifetimes, they were able to direct their attention to 4 other states and 13 other buildings, all during the financial crisis. Starting to sound off a little? Should we keep going? Let's do it. This was constructed, right? It wasn't? It wasn't founded in 1914. So we have another building that is found, and it's right in front of our faces. You do not find your house. You construct your house, and you build your house. If you need to go back and watch episode 35 for a reminder on the legal definition of the word founded, I suggest doing that after this episode. Here on the Basilica's website, we begin to find reoccurring words, and it gets really strange. The probability of this type of verbiage reoccurring in all of these narratives is mathematically impossible. Here we go. This is going to be another proof that the narrative is written and generated by the AI in the exact same sentence. We find a completely made-up story to attempt to trick us into thinking that it's a real event and giving it legs to stand on. Here we go. The altar was the gift of Mr. and Mrs. William Cullen McBride, whose daughter, Kathleen, would become the new cathedral's first bride. So in your face. The McBrides get the first bride. Of course they do. Now, remember, there's never any details on the actual construction process, because the construction never actually took place in this timeline. They do not explain how many men were used in the construction. This wasn't thousands of years ago. There should also be photographs of the building's construction. The camera was invented in 1816, so there should be something at this point, but there's nothing. I went to Chicago with Sean Hibbler a few weeks ago. He's awesome, and also exposing a lot of lies, and has been for a long time. We got a lot of cool stuff on film for the new documentary coming out in 2024, Old World Order. I'll put the link to that right in the description below. But we were asking the staff questions about the building's construction, and I'm not going to get too far into this because I don't want to give anything away. But we were basically asking why there was no photographs of the construction of the building that we were looking at, exactly like we are currently asking about the St. Louis Basilica. And the staff worker was basically saying, why would they waste their time to set up a camera back then, when it would take so long to take a photo of the construction? And she was giving the excuse that you couldn't just snap a picture with your phone like you can today. Now, I'm sorry, but when you are spending the equivalent to nearly $100 million on a building, and it only takes 3 to 5 minutes to take a photograph in 1910, someone would have done it somewhere in the world. The excuse that it would take too long and is an inconvenience is absolute nonsense and is a crutch to hold on to believing the mainstream lie. This was not thousands of years ago. This was relatively recent, and we do not have a single photograph of the construction process. It's a massive flaw in the mainstream narrative. Thomas P. Barnett was the architect for the St. Louis Basilica. His father, George I. Barnett, not a real photo, even though they had cameras in the 1800s, especially for supposedly famous people. Now, I'll tie this back in really quick here, but I want to show you all the repetition again and how obvious the lie is when you can see from this side of the board. So George finished his amazing training in England at the age of 16 and then trained with Thomas Hine. So we have another Thomas. Do we remember that his son is also Thomas? So 2 out of the 3 names are Thomas. And not only do we have this weird fact about George, but we also have this to prove my point that these are all fictional characters, especially anyone doing anything significant before 1850. They don't even know how old he was when he died because they don't give us his actual birth date. Remember, again, this is not 1,000 years ago. They know all about him when he was 16, but no clue when he was born. And these are the people that we are supposed to trust with our history. Now, are you ready to expose this thing and show how this is mathematically impossible? Are you ready to see how this is all scripted and, in my opinion, not real people? Here we go. There are 4 people involved in this story, and we are very deep right now into this. So just bear with me. 4 people. We have the father, George I. Barnett. We have his 2 sons, Thomas Barnett and George D. Barnett. And then we also have one more guy involved in this supposed architect firm, John I. Haynes, that are all connected in the weirdest way possible and proves that this is mathematically impossible and a total lie. So here we go. We have all 4 of these people right here, both Georges, Tom, and brother-in-law John. The father, George, was born in 1815 and died in 1898. The odds of him being born on December 29th, 30th, or 31st are 0.008%. So he died at the age of 82, since he most likely did not have his birthday yet in 1898. Now let's take a look at John Haynes, the son-in-law to George. He was born in 1860 and died in 1942. What are the odds that he also dies at the age of 82, just like George? And then we can take a look at both of George's sons. Let's start with George, the kid. He was born in 1863 and died in 1922. So he died at the age of 59. What are the odds that the other brother, Thomas, also dies at the age of 59? What are the odds that these 4 characters are all connected? Thomas P. Barnett, born February 11th, 1970, died September 23rd, 1929, at the age of 59. Can you see with open eyes now? Do you see how this is all here for us to find? All we have to do is look. These are characters. This building is not from our civilization. It is from a previous civilization, and we are being lied to about how it got here. There are clues within each one of these narratives. It is up to us to find them and expose them. And what are the odds that the exact same year that the St. Louis Basilica is found, the Barnett, Hayes, and Barnett Architects Company dissolves? What are the odds? You all know what I think about that. I want to point one more thing out about this narrative that I found, and you tell me what you think about this. On Wikitree, I found John Haynes, and we were told that he married into this Barnett family, with George being his father-in-law. We are told this multiple times, but when you go on Wikitree and we find this character, it starts to get even more strange, because it says that he was the husband to Harriet Haynes, which is obviously his last name, but let's click on her name. And what do you know? She is not related to George Barrett. Her family name originally being Hellery. Her dad was Henry Hellery, having zero relation to George Barrett. And this is the same John Haynes guy, being involved in the Barrett and Taylor firm as a draftsman. This is all proving that the narrative is a total fabrication. It is all over the place and shouldn't be trusted at all. When I am told one lie, I begin to question it. But when I am told an overwhelming amount of nonsense by the mainstream narrator, like we have been today, the narrator has lost my trust forever. This is not the first time. We have hours and hours of documented evidence showing that the mainstream narrative is not to be trusted at all. Here we have the Cahokia Mounds, which is only 10 miles away from St. Louis, but in my opinion, all connected to the past civilization. It's very clear that this specific location on the grid is of importance. In my opinion, these are all areas on the map that the Earth gives off a natural energy that is extremely powerful, that the past civilization was able to take advantage of. Do the so-called controllers of our current civilization know this and take advantage of this today? I would say yes. And it's weird because you have pyramids all over the place. They're everywhere. Maybe not as big as the Monks Pyramid, but there were a lot of them that have been destroyed in the last 100 years. This one is actually still here, which is exactly how our construction works today. It just lasts forever. Oh, it doesn't? No, it doesn't. And it's so weird just looking at these pictures. They look so out of place. And they look out of place because they are. And we know this here. But you look at the ground and it looks so fresh, like brand new topsoil that you buy from Home Depot. Like the grounds crew just got done raking it and getting it ready to be shown off to the public. It's honestly so weird. And what are these people doing? They don't even look real. Where are they walking to? They all look dressed up and just taking a stroll. My opinion is that those are Photoshop people. We have seen this kind of thing so many times, where they don't show any faces, and the people don't fit in with the picture. Exactly how the building, or in this case pyramid, doesn't fit in our timeline. This one was from Italy and was allegedly built in 12 BC. Oh, in only 6 years. Because of course they know the exact start and finish dates of things from 2,000 years ago. But they don't know the exact same information from only 100 years ago. And we have shown this time and time again. Over 2,000 years ago? Yet Abe Lincoln was born in a shack? So yeah, I'm not buying that nonsense. Honestly, this is the kind of stuff that gives it all away. And why we are questioning the mainstream nonsense. They can build a pyramid 2,000 years ago, and then our civilization is brainwashed and is supposed to believe that we have evolved so much after 1,800 years that we are now being born in sheds. I can't speak for everyone, but I am not going to sit here and just accept that. As I walked around this site, it is 2,200 acres. So it's obviously massive. And this story that they're going to try and tell us is nonsense. There is the Monk's Mound, which is the main one. And I say mound, but I really mean pyramid. And I'm going to call it the Monk's Pyramid from now on. This is no random mound of dirt. And this is very clear. Yet they brushed it off as a mound in its title. None of these are mounds. They're all pyramids. And they're all connected. Monk's Pyramid is 100 feet high, 955 feet long, and 775 feet wide, making it the same size at its base as the Great Pyramid of Giza, right here next to St. Louis. Let's continue on to this paragraph. The perimeter of its base is larger than the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan. All right, so we have something massive and extremely important here, covered by a layer of dirt and grass. If the layer of grass was removed and exposed what is really under it, the entire USA narrative would be completely shredded and thrown in the garbage, as it should be. People would be so confused why there's a massive pyramid and other pyramids connected to each other. It's a 2,200 acre site. Construction of the Monk's Pyramid began about 1,123 years ago, so they say, on a site that has already been occupied by buildings. Already had buildings? I'm sorry, what? In the year 900, they already had buildings? So at the same time, over in Italy, we have the St. Mark's Basilica being built in a time period before they even knew how to make paper, supposedly. So Italy is building this, and then we have massive pyramids and buildings being built in the USA. by the Mississippian culture, which is completely ridiculous. Because if they can build massive pyramids, then they can build a better hut than this to live in. The narrative is contradicting itself, because 850 years later, we get cowboys and Indians, and everyone is freezing in the winters in their shed. And so we're on the same page. The St. Mark's Basilica and these pyramids were built in the year 850 to 900, supposedly. And then we have all kinds of basilicas and massive structures being constructed for centuries in this ridiculous timeline that we're given. And then once 1900 hits, we are no longer able to construct the St. Mark's Basilica, or a Cologne Cathedral, or a Milan Cathedral. It is very clear that there was a reset, and our timeline is a complete fabrication, in my opinion. Now, if you're on the fence, this should help bring you over. If this was a narrative that you would stand by, blindly accepting no matter what, I think this is the time to reconsider. Since you would be backing up a mainstream narrative theory that is, by admission, a theory and not at all proven, botanical or a substance from a plant that they found that remains from the Monk Pyramid, suggests it was built much more quickly than previously thought, suggests, perhaps, maybe, on the order of several consecutive decades, but we don't know. It might be, providing an alternative view of its construction history. And there we have it. The mainstream narrative cannot explain these structures because they don't fit into the mainstream timeline. A much more logical explanation is that the previous civilization was here, an extremely advanced civilization. Should we blow this narrative away? Should we expose it and show that they are not being truthful with us? Should we show that it's not from 1,000 years ago? Let's do it. Thomas I. Ramey, who bought the site in 1864, of course, as soon as the 1800s hit, like we talked about, this is when they had to figure out the narrative, and this site was not fitting in. They tell us that an era of more responsible ownership began. What a joke. Many artifacts were found at or near the surface. Really? Finding the old world's things and removing them so that we don't see. Very interesting. So there were things here in the 1800s that would have been important for our research. Ramey had a tunnel made, or did he locate one? After everything we have seen, even in the last 5 episodes, do you think this guy made a tunnel, or do you think he found one? And of course, they brush it off and say that the tunnel revealed nothing of historic interest. I'm sorry, but the first time I read that, I laughed out loud. Could this be any more in your face and right on point with what we are talking about? Tunnels, removing things from the site, all once our new civilization's timeline hits. Not in the 1400s or 1600s, no. Right when the mid-1800s hit, this all takes place. Incredible. And if you thought I was crazy, thinking that removing the dirt would expose the past civilization's work, let me show you what I'm talking about, and exactly why they keep this thing covered up with grass and dirt. In 1970, they adopted an incredible strategy, one that only a genius would ever think to do, scraping away the topsoil. Unbelievable. They dug down 2 feet, and this quickly revealed various features, including what appeared to be the outline of the temple. 2 feet under the dirt, we have a temple. We have something unbelievable. This is not a mound, this is a pyramid, and I'm sure the architecture is insane and unexplainable in this make-believe mainstream narrative timeline, which is why it's covered up with dirt and grass, as well as the rest of the 2,200 acres of pyramids. This technique was, of course, opposed by professional archaeologists, so they stopped because they found too much and would shatter their lie. Wow. Now here in the preservation section, they're going to try and explain how it stays in perfect condition for hundreds and hundreds of years. But right when the 1950s hit, all of these random natural catastrophes happen. And of course, accidentally damage the clay layers within. Can you believe it? I don't. And to put a nail in this narrative, once and for all, they say this was a clay structure, but workers discovered a mass of stone deep within the mound. This is a stone structure, not a clay structure, and we are being lied to about this pyramid at every turn. covered by dirt, and the previous civilization's work is hidden in plain sight. I also went to the St. Louis Art Museum, which had the exact same interior layout as the Field Museum in Chicago, which is very strange. We all know these buildings were not built originally to be museums, but honestly, just standing in them makes you feel as if you're in a building created for giants. The doorways are massive. The ceilings are so high, it doesn't make sense for a civilization that is short and struggling through the tough times, and without proper architecture education, and going home to their huts and riding around on donkeys to be constructing massive Greco-Roman buildings, all to just show off some bones that were made in China. That was not the true reason, and we all know this. I will be getting into the narrative of this building in episode 46, as well as showing you guys the inside and what they have in their basement, as well as a few other things that I'm excited to share. We have a lot more stuff on the way. I really hope one day we can get this community big enough that we are all able to get together and get that dirt and the grass off this pyramid in central USA and let everyone see what's really under there. The view from the top of these pyramids were incredible. Being able to see the city of St. Louis from the top was very cool. And I want to leave you all with this thought. While walking up to the pyramids and just using our knowledge, and with everything else that we know about this topic, it really made me wonder how much bigger underground this pyramid really is. All right, and I don't want to be done yet. We have a short bonus for today. And as a thank you for your support, I want to have some fun and speculate on something with you all. I want to speak about the city of Turkmenistan and just introduce it for everyone that hasn't come across it yet, and also go deeper into the connection between the house of worship and this city. So there was a city named Turkmenistan, and they were supposedly taken over by Russia in the 1800s. The exact timeline that we are talking about here, where the narrative officially begins for our current civilization, in my opinion. Now, if you are new, Russia and Tartaria were the same land on the map. Russia takes over Tartaria, and Russia's flag is showing the man on the horse stabbing Tartaria's flag symbol, the griffin. So Russia is taking over these territories, including Turkmenistan, a place that is so strange. It basically looks straight out of the old world and untouched. The reason I bring this up is because we have this structure in Chicago, and we are seeing that it is all connected and 100% on a worldwide operation. The first house of worship for this group in what is now Turkmenistan. And this is how they're going to introduce all of these exact same looking structures all over the world. And what do you know? The only one that's gone is the one that was in Turkmenistan. What are the odds? So this is where we can go ahead and find even more structures from the past civilization, because they are attempting to bunch them all together to explain them all away. So we are given 8 locations of these structures that are currently standing, and honestly, these remind me exactly like Frederick's Church in Denmark. They look like we're just seeing the top of them, and they are actually so much bigger underground. We are given the one in Wilmette, Illinois, Kampala, Uganda, Sydney, Australia, Langenhain, Germany, Panama City, Panama. And is anyone else seeing what I'm seeing? That they are all in the middle of nowhere? It's very odd. Just like Turkmenistan, where it is literally in the middle of nothing. And in every single picture of this city, there are basically no people. And you have to ask logical questions at this point. Why build massive buildings and structures for nobody? You wouldn't. In my opinion, these buildings were simply found. And there is a lot more to see here in this city. And I'll dedicate a whole episode to this. But to prove the point, Teopapata, Samoa has one as well. In the middle of nowhere. It's just weird. New Delhi, India, same thing. And of course, we have this one in Santiago, Chile. It's weird. They are nowhere near anything. I know some of these were built recently, but the fact of the matter is that they all have consistencies and give us clues. And when you find smoke, there's normally fire. Patterns are extremely important when looking for lies, and that is what we are seeing here. They all have connections to Turkmenistan, and they are all in the middle of nowhere. It's odd to say the least. Are these places sitting on ley lines connected to the Earth's natural power source? Are there tunnels in these locations? We can see that the public blueprints show that this building is bigger than we can see and goes underground. And there is a door at the bottom here, leading to what? These are all over the world, yet hold the same consistencies. Something to think about for sure. Especially when you get the construction story that are basically campfire stories, where some people believe that the building was used to keep a whale alive. Others say the building was a refueling station for captured German submarines. Others say it was for kickboxing and his friend thinks it's for discos. The group that found these buildings holds the keys. And through our research, our questions, and open eyes, we continue to get closer and closer to the truth. We have some awesome stuff on the way in the next few episodes. And I want to thank our badge members and of course our Patreon members that keep this channel going. And everyone who's...
That note, shit. I'm gonna holler at y'all later too. Shit, I got some other stuff I gotta do. I appreciate it though. Peace. Hey, I'm out.